The air inside the longhouse is a thick, visible weight, tasting of peat smoke and the damp musk of wool. Light enters only in thin, accidental needles through the gaps in the thatch or the smoke hole high above, leaving the corners in a permanent, heavy amber twilight. This is not a dwelling of individual rooms or private thoughts, but a single, cavernous vessel of survival where 30 people and a dozen head of cattle exist in a forced, inescapable intimacy. Outside, the North Atlantic wind tears at the sod-covered roof, but inside, the world is defined by the reach of the central fire and the sound of breathing that never stops. To step over the high wooden threshold is to leave the open horizon behind and enter a machine built for one purpose: to keep a kinship group from freezing or starving before the next spring thaw. Every inch of this space is engineered by necessity, where the timber walls provide the only barrier between a fragile human life and the indifferent cruelty of the northern winter. The structure stretches 70 feet through the gloom, its massive oak pillars carved with the memory of trees that once stood in a sunlit world. These timbers groan under the weight of the turf roof, which can be 2 feet thick and weighs several tons, pressing down on the inhabitants with the literal gravity of the earth. Along the walls, the raised earthen platforms serve as floor, bed, and workbench, forcing every movement into a narrow central aisle of packed clay. There is no escaping the sensory overload of the household: the clatter of the loom, the rhythmic thud of a butter churn, and the low, guttural lowing of cows behind the partition create a constant acoustic pressure. Privacy is a concept that does not exist here, as every word whispered at one end of the hall vibrates through the timber to the other, making secrecy a luxury no Norse family can afford. The very architecture demands transparency, as the community functions as a single organism where any friction between members can lead to total systemic failure. On the benches, life is measured by the proximity to the hearth, the only source of warmth in a subarctic winter. The elders and the head of the house sit near the center, while children and laborers are pushed toward the drafty ends where the frost clings to the wood. In the flickering light, the soot-stained faces of the inhabitants reveal the physical toll of this architecture, as chronic lung irritation and stinging eyes are the price paid for staying warm. The smoke does not rise cleanly. It lingers at head height, forcing people to sit or crouch to find breathable air, effectively shaping the posture of an entire culture. Even sleep is a collective act, with families huddled together under heavy furs on the benches, their bodies providing the heat that the dying embers cannot sustain through the long, black night. It is a world of constant physical contact, where the boundary of the individual is blurred by the shared need for thermal energy. Food is less a pleasure and more a calculated distribution of calories, pulled from the iron cauldron that hangs perpetually over the flames. The smell of fermented fish and soured milk hangs in the rafters, a reminder of the desperate need to preserve every scrap of protein through the lean months. There are no tables in the modern sense. People eat from their laps or shared wooden bowls, using knives they carry on their belts for every task from skinning a rabbit to carving a bowl. This lack of specialized furniture reflects a life of mobility and utility, where every object must justify its space in the crowded hall. The floor itself is a layer of history, composed of trampled straw, animal bones, and the occasional dropped bead, creating a landscape that is cleaned only by adding more rushes on top of the old filth. To live here is to exist in a cycle of slow accumulation, where the waste of one season becomes the foundation for the next. One of the most overlooked aspects of this existence is the relentless battle against dampness. In a world where fire is the only tool for drying, the moisture from the breath of 30 people and their livestock condenses on the cold thatch, dripping back down in a slow, rhythmic rain of soot-streaked water. Leather rot, rust on the blades of precious iron tools, and the slow decay of woolen garments are the silent enemies of the longhouse. Every morning, the inhabitants must assess what has been lost to the rot during the night. A pair of ruined shoes is not just an inconvenience. It is a life-threatening loss for a farmer who must walk through the slush to check his traps. The economy of the house is one of constant maintenance, a desperate struggle to keep the environment from reclaiming the tools of human survival. Below the surface of this domesticity lies the invisible engine of the Viking Age, the relentless, grueling production of wool. In the dimmest part of the house, the warp-weighted loom stands like a wooden skeleton, where the women of the household spend hundreds of hours in a standing position, their fingers raw from the lanolin and the tension of the threads. A single sail for a longship requires more labor hours to weave than the ship itself takes to build, meaning the expansion of the Norse world was literally spun by hand inside these smoky walls. This labor is not optional. It is a tax on the body that begins in childhood and ends only with infirmity, binding every female member of the family to the vertical frame for the better part of their lives. The rhythmic clicking of the stone loom weights is the heartbeat of the house, signaling that the family is still solvent, still producing, still surviving. Beyond the loom, the social structure is reinforced by the distribution of light. The master of the house, the bondi, controls the fire and the oil lamps, meaning he controls the ability of others to work or move in the dark. To be cast into the shadows at the far end of the hall is a physical manifestation of low status. The thralls, or enslaved workers, exist at the periphery, sleeping on the dampest straw near the animal stalls, their lives governed by the same cycles of cold and smoke, but with none of the protection afforded to the kin. This hierarchy is not maintained by locks or guards, but by the walls of the house themselves. Outside is a wasteland of ice and predators, and inside is the only hope of a next meal. The house is both a sanctuary and a cage, where the price of safety is the total submission to the rules of the household. To understand the longhouse is to understand the total absence of the individual in favor of the collective. When a storm locks the heavy oak doors for days at a time, the psychological pressure of the enclosure becomes as dangerous as the cold. Tensions simmer in the dark, held in check only by a rigid social hierarchy and the absolute knowledge that being cast out of this house is a death sentence. There is no such thing as a self-made person in this environment. You are the sum of your contributions to the hearth, and your safety is entirely dependent on the person sleeping 3 inches away from you. This forced cooperation creates a society of high stakes and hair-trigger honor, where the smallest slight can ignite a feud because there is no physical space to retreat and de-escalate. Every interaction is weighted by the fact that you will be staring at the same faces and the same smoke for the next 5 months of winter. Deep beneath the floorboards, in the cold anaerobic earth near the animal stalls, lies the hidden waste management system of the house. The pit where the livestock are kept during the winter is designed to collect manure, which is not merely refuse, but a vital resource for warmth and future crops. The ammonia from the animal urine rises and mixes with the peat smoke, creating a chemical atmosphere that preserves the timbers of the house, but slowly poisons the lungs of those within. This is the unseen trade-off of the Viking home. The animals provide a living furnace of body heat, but their presence turns the living quarters into a barn. The barrier between human and beast is thin, porous, and often ignored when the temperature outside drops to 30 below zero. This intimate proximity to filth and livestock is the foundational reality of the era, a biological integration that modern eyes would find repulsive, but which was the only path to a sustainable harvest in the coming year. As the winter deepens, the longhouse becomes a machine of preservation for the soul as well as the body. Storytelling is not an entertainment, but a necessary tool for maintaining sanity in the claustrophobic dark. The skald, or the storyteller, uses the rhythmic crackle of the fire as a metronome, weaving tales that stretch the narrow walls of the hall out into the realms of gods and giants. But even these stories reflect the harshness of the environment. There are no happy endings without a price, and every victory is bought with the currency of blood and endurance. The myths of the Norse people are the myths of a society that lives inside a wooden box, surrounded by a world that wants to freeze them to death. The stories provide the mental space that the architecture denies, a way to escape the crushing reality of the smoke and the smell of the sheep. The culmination of this existence is found in the dead of winter rituals, where the house becomes a tomb for the living until the sun returns. Every resource is counted, every piece of dried meat is rationed, and the fear of a failing harvest becomes a physical presence in the room. The mechanism of the longhouse is designed to narrow the world down to a single fire, stripping away everything that is not essential for the continuation of the bloodline. Freedom of movement is traded for the security of the walls, and the price of that security is a life lived in shadows, soot, and the constant noise of others. As the camera drifts back through the smoke and out into the biting, clean air of the fjords, the longhouse stands as a dark, hulking shape against the snow. Not a hall of heroes, but a grim, functional fortress against an indifferent nature. The tiny pinprick of light from the smoke hole is the only sign of life in a landscape of white, a fragile defiance of the void. The weight of the silence outside is as heavy as the noise inside was oppressive, a reminder that every breath taken in that crowded hall was a victory won against the frost. The longhouse remains a monument to a time when humans were not masters of their environment, but humble inhabitants of its narrowest, warmest cracks. We leave behind the smell of the tallow and the sound of the loom, carrying with us the knowledge of how much a person can endure when the only alternative is the ice. The wood groans one last time as the wind shifts, and the embers of the hearth begin their slow, inevitable fade into the gray of morning.